Here is the uncomfortable truth about military power in the Persian Gulf. It has never been about who has the most tanks, the most jets, or the biggest budget. It has always been about who controls the choke point. And right now, one nation holds the world's economy hostage with a narrow stretch of water only 21 miles wide. Iran spends less on its military than the UAE, less than Saudi Arabia, less than Israel. And yet, when tensions rise in the Gulf, it is not Riyadh or Abu Dhabi that moves markets. It is Tehran. Because Iran understood something that the wealthiest nations missed entirely. In a world built on energy, geography is the ultimate weapon. Welcome to the financial system. Control the money, control the history. And remember, simple is never easy. To understand how Iran built this position, you have to look past the missiles and the drones. You have to follow the money. In 2024, Saudi Arabia spent nearly $80 billion on defense. The UAE allocated over $20 billion. Qatar, another $10 billion. Combined, the Gulf Cooperation Council pours over $120 billion annually into conventional military power. Jets from America, tanks from Germany, missile systems from France, the most expensive military hardware money can buy. And Iran? Official figures suggest around $8 billion, though real spending may reach $20 billion when hidden budgets are included. Either way, it is a fraction of what its neighbors spent. Yet somehow, when crisis erupts, it is Iran that dictates the tempo. How? Because Tehran chose a different strategy, one borrowed from the oldest lesson in economic warfare. Never fight where your enemy is strongest. Fight where your enemy cannot afford to lose. The Strait of Hormuz carries 20% of the world's oil supply every single day, 20 million barrels. 1/5 of global consumption passing through a channel so narrow that a single mine can send insurance premiums soaring and tanker captains turning back. Iran does not need to match the American Navy ship for ship. It does not need stealth fighters or aircraft carriers. It needs fast attack boats, anti-ship missiles, naval mines, and drones, all of which it produces domestically, cheaply, and in massive quantities. While the Gulf states buy billion-dollar jets that require American contractors to maintain, Iran manufactures Shahed drones at roughly $20,000 each. That is not just frugality, that is asymmetric economics. For every dollar Iran spends on disruption, its enemies must spend 100 on defense, and the math only gets worse for those trying to contain it. But the financial genius runs deeper than cheap weapons. Iran built something the Gulf monarchies never could, a network. Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, factions in Syria. These are not just ideological allies, they are force multipliers purchased at a fraction of the cost of standing armies. Estimates suggest Iran spends between $1 and $2 billion annually funding its entire proxy network. That is less than the operating cost of a single American aircraft carrier. And yet, that network stretches Iran's reach from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. When Houthi missiles target Red Sea shipping, global freight costs spike. When Iraqi militias strike American bases, the Pentagon diverts resources. Every proxy action forces a response, and every response costs more than the original attack. Tehran does not need to win battles, it needs to impose costs, and imposing costs is free. This strategy has a name economists would recognize: leverage. Iran has leveraged geography, ideology, and asymmetric capability into something no amount of Gulf petrodollars can easily counter. Because the Gulf states face a problem money alone cannot solve. They have purchased some of the most advanced weapons ever built: Patriot missiles, F-15s, THAAD systems, Apache helicopters. But advanced weapons require advanced maintenance, specialized training, foreign contractors, spare parts that take months to arrive. Saudi Arabia may own the jets, but it does not own the supply chain. If Washington ever hesitates, if American support wavers even for a moment, those billion-dollar systems become expensive museum pieces. Iran, by contrast, designs and builds its own weapons. They may not be as sophisticated, but they are domestic, they are sustainable, and in a long war, the nation that can replace what it loses wins. Now, consider what happened after the 12-day war in June 2025. Israel and the United States struck Iranian nuclear sites and military infrastructure. Casualties were significant. Air defenses were degraded. On paper, Iran appeared weakened, but within months, Tehran had tripled its military budget. It shifted doctrine from defensive to explicitly offensive. It replenished missile stockpiles using materials purchased from China. And, crucially, it retained the one capability that matters most, the ability to disrupt the Strait of Hormuz. Because here is what the conflict revealed. Iran's real deterrent was never its air force, which flies aging American jets from the 1970s. It was never its conventional army. It was the threat of economic devastation. Close Hormuz for a week and oil prices double. Close it for a month and global supply chains fracture. European factories shut down. Asian economies stall. Inflation rips through every nation that depends on Gulf energy. Iran may lose the battle, but the world loses the war. And that calculus is what keeps American carriers at a distance and Saudi princes negotiating rather than escalating. Yet there is a darker dimension to this story, one that reveals the limits of Iran's approach. Because financial leverage cuts both ways. Iran's economy is shattered. Decades of sanctions have eroded infrastructure, collapsed the currency, and driven inflation past 50%. The very strategy that gives Tehran power abroad cripples it at home. Military spending consumes resources that could build hospitals, schools, and industry. The regime must balance external projection against internal survival. And every rial spent on missiles is a rial not spent on the population whose discontent threatens the system from within. This is the trap of asymmetric empire. You can threaten the world, you can make yourself indispensable to regional chaos, but you cannot eat missiles. You cannot pay salaries with drones. Iran's military posture succeeds precisely because the cost of challenging it is too high, but the cost of maintaining it is also high. The question is not whether Iran can dominate the Gulf. The question is whether Iran can afford to. And that question has no easy answer, because the Gulf states, for all their expensive weapons and foreign dependencies, have something Iran lacks: liquidity. Saudi Arabia holds hundreds of billions in reserves. It can sustain losses. It can absorb shocks. Iran operates on margins so thin that a single year of intensified sanctions could trigger collapse. The regime survives through smuggling, shadow fleets, and discounted oil sales to China, none of which provide the stability that true power requires. So, is Iran the new king of the Gulf? The answer depends on what you mean by king. If power means the ability to disrupt, to threaten, to impose costs that nobody wants to pay, then yes, Iran holds a kind of throne. It sits on a narrow choke point and demands the world pay attention. But if power means stability, sustainability, the capacity to build rather than merely destroy, then Iran is no king at all. It is a hostage to its own leverage, trapped between enemies it cannot defeat and an economy it cannot fix. The Gulf remains a balance of weaknesses, not strengths. And in that balance, the one who controls the narrowest passage holds the greatest card, even if the hand itself is losing. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. Its financial system in history leaves clues. I show you where the money leads.